Teresa's true story from Texas. When silence became impossible, there are things a mother swallows that would poison anyone else. And Teresa swallowed them for 4 years before her body and soul refused to hold them anymore. A retired school teacher from a small town outside Austin, she raised her son Daniel with a kind of love that never asks for receipts. But when her daughter-in-law issued an ultimatum, stay quiet or lose access to your grandchildren, Teresa discovered that silence has a cost far greater than speaking the truth. This is her story, and it begins long before the ultimatum, long before the tears and the lawyers and the terrible Thanksgiving that changed everything. It begins with who Teresa was when she still believed that loving someone enough would always be enough to keep them close. At 62, Teresa Harmon lived in a pale yellow house on 3 acres just outside Dripping Springs, Texas, where the hill country rolls out soft and wide, and the evenings smell like cedar and warm limestone. She had taught 4th grade for 27 years at the same elementary school, the kind of teacher who kept a drawer full of granola bars for kids who came in hungry and wrote personal notes on every report card. She retired not because she wanted to, but because her knees and her heart told her it was time. Her husband, David, had died 8 years earlier from a cardiac event that arrived without warning on a Tuesday morning while he was watering the front yard roses. He was 56, she was 54, and in the space of one ordinary morning, her entire life divided into before and after. She never remarried. People asked, and Teresa always gave the same answer with a soft smile. She had Daniel, she had her garden, she had her church group on Wednesdays, and that was more than enough. But the deeper truth was simpler. Daniel was 16 when his father died, and she decided in those first raw weeks of grief that her boy would not lose the stability of his home on top of losing his dad. No new men at the breakfast table, no complicated loyalties, just the two of them figuring it out. She picked up summer tutoring jobs to pay for Daniel's baseball camps because the boy had a good arm and a better attitude, and she refused to let money be the thing that stopped him. She drove him to every game within 200 miles, grading papers in the bleachers, with a thermos of coffee and a highlighter behind her ear. They ate dinner together almost every night, even when he was 17 and moody, even when he was 18 and pulling away the way boys do. Their bond was not dramatic. It was built on honesty and quiet sacrifice, on showing up without fanfare, and it was the strongest thing Teresa had ever known. So when Daniel graduated from Texas State and landed a job in Austin, doing something with software that Teresa never fully understood but always praised, she felt a bone-deep pride that she had done it, raised a good man, a kind man, a man who called his mother on Sundays and meant it. The day he brought Megan home, Teresa made chicken fried steak and her mother's peach cobbler, and set the table with the good dishes she hadn't used since David's funeral reception. Megan was 26, dark-haired, confident, and Teresa liked her immediately the way she touched Daniel's arm when she laughed, complimented the cobbler without being asked, offered to wash dishes, and actually meant it. Over the following months, they shared cooking sessions in Teresa's kitchen. Megan, teaching her a lemon pasta from her own grandmother. Teresa showing Megan proper cornbread in a cast iron skillet. When the wedding planning began, Teresa was included in every decision, and she felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, the hope that she was gaining a daughter. Teresa believed in a simple philosophy when it came to family. You mind your own business. You give newlyweds room to breathe. You trust that love will keep the doors open. She had watched other mothers suffocate their sons' marriages with opinions and unannounced visits, and she swore she would never become that woman. She chose restraint, chose grace, chose to step back and let Daniel and Megan build their own life. When Lily was born on a bright March morning, Teresa held her granddaughter in the hospital room and wept without apology. For the first 6 months she was there 3 days a week, helping with night feedings, folding tiny laundry, rocking Lily in the same chair she had once rocked Daniel. Megan seemed grateful, even affectionate, and Teresa allowed herself to believe that everything she had sacrificed had quietly blossomed into something beautiful. But somewhere between Lily's first birthday and the arrival of the second grandchild, the temperature in her relationship with Megan began to shift, not with a slammed door or a raised voice, but in a way so gradual it made Teresa wonder if she was imagining things. It started with things so small Teresa felt foolish noticing them. A text left unread for hours, then half a day, then not answered at all. Daniel said Megan was overwhelmed with the baby and the new pregnancy. Teresa understood she had been a young mother once. She knew the fog of exhaustion. So she told herself to be patient, told herself she was reading too much into nothing. But nothing kept accumulating. Visits that once lasted an entire afternoon were trimmed to an hour, sometimes less. Megan always had a reason, a pediatrician appointment, a nap schedule, a friend coming over. Teresa would drive 45 minutes each way for 60 minutes with Lily, and she did it gratefully because 60 minutes of holding her granddaughter was worth every mile. When she offered to babysit so they could have a date night, the answer was always warm but closed. "We've got it handled, but thank you, Teresa." Handled, as if her help were a problem already solved. Then came the rules, delivered in that tone Megan had perfected, casual enough to sound reasonable, firm enough to shut down any response. No sugar for the kids. No posting photos online. Teresa could accept those. But then Megan asked her, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, to stop singing the Spanish nursery rhymes to Lily. Teresa's late husband Miguel had sung those same songs to Daniel when he was small. De Colores at bath time, Los Palitos Dyson before bed. They were the last living thread of a man she had loved and buried too young. Megan said it was about consistency. She didn't want the kids confused by 2 languages before they were ready. Teresa opened her mouth to object and found the conversation had already moved on, as if the matter were settled. She didn't argue. She told herself it was Megan's house, Megan's children, Megan's right. But that night, alone in the house where she had raised Daniel, she whispered the words to Los Palitos Dyson into the dark, and the silence that answered felt like something breaking. Daniel was drifting too. Phone calls thinned from weekly to bi-weekly to whenever Teresa called first. When she finally asked gently if something was wrong, Daniel sighed. "Megan just likes to keep things simple, Mom. Don't take it personally." His voice had a flatness Teresa recognized the voice of a man who had rehearsed his lines, who had chosen peace in his own home over honesty with the woman who raised him. She had heard that voice before in her own throat, years ago when she swallowed words to keep the household calm. She knew the cost. She knew Daniel didn't see it yet. Thanksgiving nearly broke her. She woke at 4, and spent 6 hours making tamales Miguel's mother's recipe, the one she'd learned as a bride of 19, made every Thanksgiving since Daniel was 5. She drove 2 hours with the tamal still warm, the car smelling like every good memory she had. Megan met her at the front door. "Oh, Teresa, I should have told you we ordered catering this year. The kitchen is closed off." She said it brightly. "The way you deliver news you know will sting, but have decided is not your problem." Teresa stood on the porch, holding a lifetime of tradition in a foil pan, and understood, with a clarity that hurt worse than anger, that she had not been considered at all. She sat at her son's table that afternoon, smiled, complimented the catered turkey, held baby Ethan, and said all the right things. Then she drove 2 hours home in the dark and cried so hard she had to pull over twice because she couldn't see the road. For weeks, Teresa carried a shame she couldn't name. She felt discarded and told herself she was dramatic. She lay awake, replaying conversations, searching for the moment she'd done something wrong. Surely a good mother would not feel pushed out of her own son's life. The self-doubt was relentless, whispering she was too much, too needy, too old-fashioned. It was her sister Rosa, who finally held up a mirror. Over coffee one Saturday, Teresa broke down and told her everything: the rules, the silence, the tamales left untouched. Rosa listened, set her cup down, and said, "Mija, you're being erased from your own family." Teresa shook her head. She wasn't ready to hear it, wasn't ready to name it, because naming it would mean deciding what to do. And she had spent her whole life choosing to endure rather than confront. But the truth has a way of forcing itself into the open. And it took one phone call, 3 sentences long, to turn Teresa's quiet hurt into something she could no longer contain. That phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The bluebonnets had just started blooming along the highway, and Teresa had been thinking all morning about taking Lily out to the fields for photos, the way they'd done every spring, since the girl was old enough to sit up on a blanket. It was their tradition, one of the few she still had left. So she called Daniel's house, expecting her son's voice, expecting something simple. Megan answered instead. Her voice carried no warmth, no greeting. It was flat, controlled, and rehearsed. "Teresa, I need you to understand something. If you want to stay in the kids' lives, you need to stop questioning how we do things. Just be quiet and go along, or this gets harder for everyone." 3 sentences, that was all it took. Teresa didn't argue. She said, "Okay," and hung up. Then she sat down at her kitchen table, the same table where she had fed Daniel cereal before school, helped him with homework, packed his lunches with little notes tucked inside, and she did not move for 2 hours. The light shifted across the room. The coffee went cold. She sat there, feeling those words settle into her bones like stones dropped into still water. Just be quiet. The phrase reached back into every moment she had bitten her tongue, every holiday she'd smiled through pain, every rule she'd followed without protest. Megan wasn't asking for boundaries. She was demanding submission, telling a 62-year-old woman who had raised a family, buried a husband, and rebuilt her life from grief to make herself small and silent or lose everything. The worst part was that Teresa almost accepted it. She almost decided that quiet compliance was worth the chance to see her grandchildren. But then she started paying attention. Really paying attention the way you do when something breaks open inside you, and the details you overlooked come rushing into painful focus. It started with a text. Daniel had accidentally forwarded a conversation with Megan, clearly not meant for Teresa's eyes. Megan was coaching him on what to say. Tell her the kids are busy. Say we already have plans. Don't let her guilt you. Teresa read those messages 3 times, hands trembling not from anger, but from the quiet devastation of seeing her son being scripted away from her. He wasn't choosing distance. He was being directed toward it, one instruction at a time. Then she noticed her absence from the family group chat. Daniel's cousin mentioned a thread where everyone shared holiday photos, and when Teresa asked, the silence told her everything. She had been removed without announcement, as though she had ceased to be part of the family. Birthday plans for the children came and went without her knowledge. She learned about parties weeks later through photos posted by people she barely knew. Financial requests still came, though Daniel would call, awkward and rushed, explaining that Megan needed help with something for the house or the kids. Teresa always said yes, because that is what mothers do. Not once did she receive a thank you. The woman being erased from family life was still funding parts of it, but it was Lily's drawing that broke her. During one of her rare supervised visits, Lily brought home a school project, a crayon drawing titled My Family, in wobbly kindergarten letters, stick figures with bright smiles, mommy, daddy, baby brother, even the dog. Teresa scanned every corner of the paper. She wasn't there. She kept her voice light. Lily, sweetie, how come Grandma's not in the picture? The 5-year-old looked up with devastating honesty. Mommy says you're not real family. You're just Daddy's mom. Something cracked inside Teresa that afternoon, something deep and structural, like a beam giving way in a house that has held weight too long. She smiled at Lily, told her the drawing was beautiful, and waited until she was in her car to weep. She spent the next week thinking, praying every morning, writing pages in her journal. Slowly, through grief, rage, and the exhaustion of keeping peace at the cost of her own existence, a decision took shape. She would not stay quiet. Not for revenge. Teresa had never been built for vengeance. But because her silence was teaching Lily and baby James that love comes with conditions, that women must shrink to keep peace, that grandmothers can be erased when they become inconvenient, she would speak. Not shout, not scream, not make the scene Megan perhaps expected. She would speak with the steady clarity of a woman who has finally stopped being afraid of her own truth. What Teresa did next wasn't dramatic in the way movies show confrontation. It was deliberate, measured, and devastating in its honesty. She chose a letter, not an email that could be forwarded with a click, not a text lost between ads and reminders. Teresa sat at the kitchen table where she had once helped Daniel with algebra, and she wrote by hand. 7 pages. Her penmanship, always careful from decades of grading, carried every word with intent. She started from the beginning, the first Thanksgiving, when Megan whispered that her cooking wasn't good enough. She included dates because a teacher's habit of documentation had served her without her realizing it. She wrote down the direct quotes carved into her memory. She described the pattern she had only recently allowed herself to see. Isolation disguised as boundary setting. Control dressed up as preference. Erasure packaged as family harmony. But the letter was not an accusation. Between every documented incident, she wrote what she felt, the confusion, the self-doubt. The mornings she woke, wondering if she truly was the problem. She told Daniel she loved him in language only a mother can use, the kind evident in packed lunches and bedside prayers and standing in the rain at every football game. She loved him too much to keep pretending. At the end, she made no demands. She asked for one honest conversation. She mailed it on a Tuesday. Then she did something that took almost more courage than the letter itself. She called Megan's mother. Patricia lived in Oklahoma, and they had only met a handful of times. Teresa didn't call to attack Megan. She called to ask whether Patricia had noticed changes in Daniel. The silence on the line lasted so long. Teresa thought the call had dropped. Then Patricia began to cry deep, shaking sobs that spoke of years of suppressed grief. When she gathered herself, Patricia admitted something Teresa hadn't expected. Megan had done this before, to her own family. She had cut off her brother over a disagreement, so minor Patricia couldn't remember what started it. She controlled information between family members, deciding who knew what and when. She rewrote narratives until people who'd been present doubted their own memory. Patricia had watched it happen and stayed quiet, because the threat was always the same: speak up and lose access to Megan, to Daniel, to the grandchildren. Patricia had chosen silence for the same reason Teresa almost had. Love made hostage is still love, and the ransom is always your voice. That call lasted 2 hours. 2 mothers on opposite ends of a line finally saying aloud what they had carried alone. Then came the waiting. 3 days of checking her phone every hour, barely sleeping, second-guessing every sentence. On the 3rd night, past midnight, her phone rang. Daniel was crying not composed, embarrassed tears, but the raw, broken crying of a son confronted with a truth he had spent years refusing to see. He had read the letter 4 times. Each time, another wall inside him crumbled. He admitted what Teresa had suspected, but never dared assume he had known. Beneath the daily work of managing Megan's moods, he had known something was wrong, but he had convinced himself that keeping Megan calm meant keeping the family together. He had mistaken appeasement for peace. His voice broke. "Mom, I've been so tired of managing her feelings that I forgot I was losing you." Teresa held the phone and let her son cry. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply stayed on the line, breathing with him the way she had when he was small and frightened of storms. But if Teresa hoped the truth would move through her family like healing, she was wrong. When Megan discovered the letter and the call to Patricia, her response was immediate. She posted on social media painting Teresa as a toxic, manipulative mother-in-law determined to destroy her marriage. She told mutual friends Teresa had boundary issues, weaponizing therapy language stripped of real meaning. She threatened a restraining order. In a bigger city, it might have gained traction. But Teresa had taught in the same small Texas town for 30 years. Hundreds of families knew her patience, her fairness, her quiet kindness. The post backfired former students, fellow teachers, neighbors called with support. Yet Teresa felt no victory. She sat surrounded by evidence of community love and felt only exhaustion, heartbreak, and a terror so deep it had no bottom. She had spoken her truth, and it had set things in motion she could not control. In those sleepless nights, she did not know whether she had saved her relationship with her son or shattered it beyond repair. The weeks that followed weren't a resolution, they were a reckoning. And what Teresa learned during that time would reshape how she understood marriage, family boundaries, and the price of peace. 2 months passed before Daniel made his decision. 2 months of silence between mother and son, of awkward phone calls that lasted less than a minute, of Teresa staring at photographs of her grandchildren and wondering if those frames would become the only way she'd ever see their faces again. But Daniel did something. Teresa hadn't expected something. Truthfully, she wasn't sure he still had in him. He told Megan they were going to couples counseling, not as a suggestion, not as a request she could deflect or delay, as a condition for him staying in the marriage. And he added one more thing, a line he refused to erase, no matter how many arguments it sparked. His mother would be part of their children's lives. Not on holidays alone, not through supervised visits as though she were some kind of danger, but with reasonable, consistent access. The way a grandmother should be present. The way his mother had earned the right to be present. Megan resisted. Of course she did. For weeks, she pushed back with every tool she had: tears, accusations, silence, threats to take the kids and stay with her sister in Houston. But something had broken open in Daniel during those 2 months. Maybe it was reading his mother's post and recognizing, for the first time, just how much she had swallowed over the years. Maybe it was hearing his own children ask why Grandma didn't come around anymore and not having an answer that made sense. Whatever it was, he held firm. For the first time in their marriage, Megan encountered a version of Daniel who would not fold, and that shift, small as it may sound, changed the architecture of everything that followed. It wasn't healing. Teresa wants to be clear about that. It was the beginning of a different dynamic, one built not on warmth, but on honesty about what each person needed and what each person would no longer tolerate. The counselor they saw together, all 3 of them, eventually, in a series of difficult sessions, helped put language to what had been happening. The pattern Megan had followed had a clinical shape, a recognizable structure. The counselor called it coercive control extended into in-law relationships. It was never about Teresa being a bad grandmother. It was never about the toys or the sugar or the visits lasting too long. It was about Megan needing to control the narrative of their family, who belonged, who mattered, whose version of events would be accepted as truth. The counselor explained something that lodged itself deep in Teresa's chest and has stayed there since. When one person requires everyone else's silence to maintain their version of reality, that reality is built on something fragile. It cannot survive contact with the truth, which is exactly why the truth must be suppressed at every turn. Teresa sat in that counselor's office and felt decades of confusion crystallize into something she could finally hold and examine. Every dismissed concern, every rule that changed without warning, every conversation where she'd been made to feel ungrateful for wanting more, it all fit a pattern she hadn't been able to name. But the counselor didn't let Teresa off the hook entirely, and Teresa respects that now, even though it stung at the time. Because Teresa had her own reckoning to face. Not for causing the problem, she didn't cause it, but for enabling it to grow roots so deep that pulling them out nearly destroyed the family. Every time she stayed quiet, she had given the silence more power. Every time she excused Megan's behavior to a friend or to herself, she had helped build the wall that eventually locked her out. Every time she told herself, "It's not my place," she had handed away a little more of her place until there was almost none left. She learned something that every person in a family like this eventually has to confront. Loving someone does not mean accepting mistreatment as the cost of access. That bargain is not love. It is surrender dressed in love's clothing. Teresa speaks now about marriage with the kind of clarity that only comes from watching one nearly dissolve from the inside. She says marriage doesn't mean you own your spouse's entire family. When you marry someone, you inherit their history, their people, their roots, the Sunday traditions, the grandmother's recipes, the stories told at Thanksgiving that everyone has heard 40 times but laughs at anyway. You don't get to prune the tree down to just the branches you like. Healthy marriages, Teresa believes, make room. They expand to hold more people, more love, more history. They don't build walls against the people who loved your spouse before you ever existed. Today, Teresa sees her grandchildren regularly. She takes them for ice cream on Saturdays. She helps with homework on Wednesday evenings. She is present in their lives in the steady, unglamorous way that grandmothers are supposed to be. But things with Megan remain careful, measured. They exchange polite greetings. They coordinate schedules without conflict. They are not friends. Teresa suspects they never will be, and she has made peace with that because peace, she now understands, does not require friendship. It requires honesty. Their arrangement is built on transparency rather than silence, on clear expectations rather than unspoken rules that shift like sand. The relationship isn't warm, but it is honest. And honest, Teresa learned the hard way, is enough. Teresa's story doesn't end with a Hallmark resolution. It ends with something more valuable, hard-won wisdom she wants to pass forward. So here is what Teresa wants you to know, not as advice from someone who got everything right, but as hard-won truth from a woman who spent 4 years drowning in her own silence before she found the courage to breathe. The first thing she will tell you, if you ask, is this: silence is not loyalty. She confused staying quiet with being a good mother. She thought that if she just loved hard enough, asked for nothing, expected nothing, they would eventually see her. They would notice the empty chair where she used to sit. They would feel the gap where her voice used to be. But that is not how silence works. Silence does not build bridges. It just makes your absence easier to ignore. It trains the people around you to believe that you are fine with disappearing. And once they believe that, they stop looking for you altogether. Teresa wants every mother-in-law listening to this to hear her clearly. Your pain is valid. Your presence in your family matters. And demanding basic respect, asking to be included in the lives you helped build, that is not being difficult. That is being human. The second thing Teresa learned is that patterns set early. They calcify fast. She can look back now and trace the warning signs to the very first year of Daniel and Megan's marriage, when all communications started flowing through one person, when rules appeared without any mutual discussion, when Daniel started sounding less like himself and more like he was reading from a script someone else had written for him. Teresa ignored those signs because she wanted to believe the best. She wanted to trust that love would sort itself out. But love without honesty does not sort itself out. It just rots quietly until someone finally opens the door and confronts what has been growing in the dark. She urges anyone listening not to wait 4 years the way she did. Address it at year 1, at month 6, at week 2. Whenever the pattern first becomes visible, name it. Say it out loud. Because the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to untangle what has already hardened into the shape of your family's new normal. But Teresa is careful here, and this matters. She does not believe that daughters-in-law or sons-in-law are wrong for setting boundaries. Boundaries are healthy. Boundaries are necessary. Every new family unit has the right to define how it operates, what it needs, and how much space it requires to grow. Teresa respects that completely. What she wants people to understand is the difference between boundaries and control. Boundaries are mutual. They are discussed. They are built with respect for everyone involved. What Megan did was not boundary setting. It was isolation dressed in the language of boundaries. There is a world of difference between saying, "We need space this weekend," and saying, "You are not allowed to be part of this family unless you comply with rules you had no voice in creating." One is a conversation, the other is a wall. And Teresa spent 4 years pressing her hands against that wall, believing it was a door that would eventually open if she was patient enough. It never did. She had to find her own way through. She also has words for the Daniels of the world, the ones caught in the middle, loving their parent and their spouse in equal measure, and feeling like any step toward one is a step away from the other. Teresa understands that position now better than she did when she was living through it. She no longer blames Daniel for the years he spent trying to keep everyone calm, but she wants every adult child in that impossible middle space to know something. You are not a bridge that has to let everyone walk over you. You are a person, a whole person with the power to say, "Both of you matter to me, and I will not sacrifice one relationship to protect the other." That is not choosing sides. That is choosing integrity. And your family, all of it, needs you to be brave enough to choose it. Teresa sits on her porch in dripping springs most evenings now. The Texas sky opens wide above the hills and the light lingers long before it fades. Lily calls her every Sunday without fail. They talk about school and friends and whatever small drama fills a 9-year-old's world. The second grandchild, James, is 3 now. He is learning the Spanish nursery rhymes that Teresa's husband used to sing decades ago, songs Teresa taught him herself during those Wednesday homework evenings that have quietly become one of the most sacred hours of her week. It is not the life Teresa imagined. It is smaller, quieter, marked by a loss she will always carry, relationships that will never fully mend, trust that was broken in ways that leave permanent seams. But it is on, and Teresa has learned through every painful chapter of this story that an honest life, even one that aches, holds more love than a silent one ever could. The story closes with Teresa reflecting on what rebuilding looks like when you choose honesty over forced peace, and the quiet wisdom she offers to others walking the same painful road.